Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'll be giving you all my updated prediction for the 2024 presidential election. It's been almost 2 months since I last did one of these, and a lot has changed. Donald Trump is now officially a convicted felon. Joe Biden's approval rating just today hit another all-time low. So things have gotten worse for both sides somehow. Things have maybe gotten better for both sides depending on what polls you're looking at. But overall, this election is still very close. It remains close. And I'm going to tell you who I believe would win if it were held tomorrow. Now, you might be thinking, why are we working under the assumption it's held tomorrow? Why not do what we think is going to happen between now and November? And I know a lot of people do that when they make these videos, but I often find that bias is a very, very important factor when people are guessing what's going to happen between now and November, because the truth is nobody has a crystal ball. And no one can tell you what is going to happen, whether it's political or apolitical, what will happen between now and November. And all those things can have some level of impact on a presidential election. And so often, if you're predicting an election and you want a certain candidate to win, whether that be Biden or Trump, you assume things will get better for your candidate before November. That is a problem. I'm going to work in this thought experiment with the assumption that this election is held tomorrow, because I'm not going to try to play the game or even introduce the possibility for that bias to seep into my analysis. But before I get into that, we need to talk. 2/3 of my views in the past month, I just checked YouTube Studio 5 minutes before this, so I'm sure 2/3 of my views in the past month have come from people who are not subscribed to this channel. And I know everyone asks you to subscribe. There's not a YouTuber in the world who doesn't want you to subscribe, but I'm definitely on the smaller side of channels, and I am working hard to put out content for you guys on a weekly basis, if not more often. 3 to 4 times a week is my goal, especially since it's summer now. So if you would subscribe right now, I'd really appreciate it. It would help me out more than you will know, and it genuinely means a lot to me because I'm sitting here making an election prediction video, and I'm already grateful for the 7.7K I already have. That is more than I ever thought I'd have. So I'm immensely grateful to all of you that are subscribed. Please know how much you mean to me. And if you are not subscribed, I would be eternally grateful if you join that group of 7.7 thousand people. It is a very great group of people. But regardless, let me talk about this election because, as I always say, no one clicks on these videos to watch me talk about why you should subscribe. I'm going to start by filling out the states that are safe for Joe Biden, and then I'll do the same for Donald Trump. I'm not particularly rigid with these margins. I say that it's around a 15% margin for a state to be given the safe characterization. But let's say Oregon votes for Biden by 14. Doesn't really mean much, but there's not a lot we can gain by talking about Oregon because we know it's going to vote for Joe Biden, whether it's by 14%, 16%, or 15%. I don't know, but it will be in that area. Same thing for Donald Trump. He might win Montana by 14 instead of 16. He might win Nebraska's 1st district by 13 instead of 17. Regardless, it doesn't electorally doesn't do us a lot of good to talk about those states because we do know how they're going to vote. So for Donald Trump, I'm going to give him 116 safe electoral votes, Biden 191. And then we're going to get into the likely states, and then once we're done with those, we have our list of competitive states, and I'll talk about those in depth. So the likely states for Biden, I'm going to say New Mexico. I'm going to go over to Virginia, to New Hampshire, and then Maine's 2 at-large electoral votes. I think that these are all pretty self-explanatory. New Hampshire has shifted away from Republicans recently. Maine at-large is, Biden won it by, I think, almost 10% in 2020. I think he'll win it by a bit less this time, but it won't be anything significant any significant swing towards Trump. New Mexico is a state that I do genuinely expect Trump to do better in by a good amount. He lost it by, I believe, 11% in 10% in 2020. I think he could lose by 6 or 7 this time. Still likely, but there will be a shift towards Donald Trump, I'd expect. And then Virginia. Virginia's the one a lot of people have been talking about. I actually made a video about it. But we did see a poll that came out of Fox News that had a tied race here, 48% for Biden, 48% for Trump. And that's one poll. It is interesting. The crosstabs weren't horrible on it, but still something to note. Regardless, I'm not going to back down. I'm going to say Virginia's still going to go to Biden by 8 points, if I had to guess. It's a left-running state, and Republicans did do well there in 2021. Don't think they did well enough in 2022 for me to warrant this being truly competitive. especially for Donald Trump, who's not very popular here. And then final addition to the likely column for Biden, Nebraska 2nd District. The new district was drawn to be about Biden plus 6 in 2020. I bet he'll win it by a similar amount, maybe a point or so more. Now, Donald Trump, he's going to win Alaska by a likely margin. We're going to go to Iowa, Ohio, Florida. There's a lot of likely red states, although not Maine's 1st district. And then the big one is Texas. So I'll talk about these a little more because they're so big. Ohio, Texas, and Florida, they combine for 87 electoral votes. Yeah, I thought I did the math wrong for a second, but 87 electoral votes, and if Biden wins any one of these states, Trump, the election is over. But luckily for Trump, he is not at real risk of losing any of these 3 states. Ohio voted for him by 8% in 2020. It is a right-trending state. Democrats might win the Senate race there. It's a competitive Senate race. Trump will win Ohio, 17 electoral votes. There's not a doubt in my mind about that. Florida was close in 2020. It was about a 3.5-point margin for Trump, but even that at the time was seen as a major, defeat for Democrats because Florida is usually within a point, and it had a streak of being within a point dating back to 2008. And so, in 2020 and 2022, we saw Republicans rapidly expand their margins of victory. In 2022, Republicans won the Senate race by, I think, 17, the governorship by 19. This state is no longer competitive. Florida is a red state now. Texas is the last big one I want to talk about here. Again, in 2020, the state was the closest it's been in a considerable amount of time, with Biden coming within 6% of winning it. Regardless, I do think that Trump is actually going to do about the same as he did last time in Texas. I would expect Donald Trump to do a lot better in the Rio Grande Valley. He did very well there in 2020. If you compare it to 2016, a lot of big red areas. That means Trump improved on his numbers from 2016. I think he'll do even better this time. Biden will likely expand in the suburbs. We saw swings in Dallas and San Antonio, Austin, even north of Houston. Biden did better there. I would expect him to continue that trend. Trends, aren't going to stop. But I think Trump will hold his ground and actually do better in the cities themselves. Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, those are the biggest 3 cities in Texas. The city propers I'd expect to swing towards Trump. And I think turnout's going to be a big issue for Biden. Biden is, if he wins Texas, he will need a lot of turnout from the cities of Dallas, the city of Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, even El Paso. It's a little smaller, but still significant for Democrats because they need to win those cities and net a lot of votes out of them. But Biden, very unpopular candidate, not a lot of enthusiasm surrounding him right now. I think he's going to struggle with turnout. And in Texas, where Democrats know they're not likely to win, they're not going to be spending a lot of money on get out the vote operations. I think Trump's going to end up cruising here, winning by 5 or 6 points once again. So let's go over to our competitive states. Kansas. How could I forget Kansas is not competitive? But these are our competitive states. These states I do believe will be within 5%. And that's what's so interesting because it's the same states with the addition of Minnesota now, actually, to the competitive column, I believe, from last time. But it's the same states that we expect to be competitive. And so you're going to see that this map, though the competitive states remain the same, aside from Minnesota being added to that category, the margins are going to be different, very different. So we're going to start out with the lean Biden states. I think the first is Minnesota. This is kind of the obvious one. I do think it could be within 5%, but I don't believe Trump has a good chance of winning here. In 2020, we saw Joe Biden win it by 7 points. I do think it'll be less this time, but it won't be competitive. It won't be, or it'll be close, but I don't think it'll be too contested by the Trump campaign. I think they know that they have better places to win. And Minnesota, in 2016, it was close, but even then, Trump couldn't win it. So this state, in terms of margin, maybe within 4 or 5 points, but I would be very surprised if Biden actually lost Minnesota. But we do have some close polls out of the state. It's a white state, a lot of working class voters that are still voting Democrat that could at any moment transition to being Republican. Kind of in a way similar to what we saw in 2016, where we had big Democratic working class bases of a lot of white voters that swung towards Trump. Minnesota kind of has lagged behind a little bit. The white working class in Minnesota have moved towards Republicans in the past decade, but not at the rate of their neighbors, and that could be an interesting factor to watch. Maybe Minnesota finally swings a lot this year, and that narrows the state's margin. Regardless, I don't think it's going to swing enough to actually flip red. It hasn't voted for Republicans since 1972, and I don't think that'll change this year, even if Biden does lose the election. So let's go over to our lean Republican states. There's only one lean Democratic state. Arizona, I obviously can make the case for. I'm going to put it in the Tilt Democratic column, and we're going to talk about that in a second here. But obviously, I do believe Biden will win Arizona, but I don't think it'll be by more than 2%. So let's go to our lean Republican states here. The first is going to be North Carolina. North Carolina could really be a problem for Biden this year. Now, he doesn't need to win it. He didn't win it last time, and he was just fine. But it would definitely be a nice addition to his column. And if Biden won North Carolina, it would be very hard for Trump to win. Now, here's the problem for Biden in North Carolina. Just summed up, he lost it by around 80,000 votes last time. A little less than that, 75,000 votes, and he can't gain this time. Now, I'm not saying the Biden victory in North Carolina is impossible, but when you look at this map, you'll see he did very well in a lot of these suburbs, right? Like north of Charlotte, in the Raleigh area, in the Research Triangle, even Greensboro. You go to the western part of the state, where Asheville is out here in Buncombe County. Big swings towards Biden. He didn't win it in 2020, and the suburbs are going to continue to move towards him. But when you look at these cities and the rural areas, I think they're going to get better for Trump. Because in rural North Carolina, Trump didn't do, he did well. He did well enough to win. But he can improve his margin in a lot of these counties. These are southern counties that, rural southern counties that are mostly white tend to be 80-90% Republican. In North Carolina, they're high 60s, low 70s. So Trump, if racial polarization continues, will do better in these counties. Now, a lot of people think we're going to see racial depolarization this year, with Biden doing better with white voters and Trump doing better with voters of color, because that's what the polls are saying. I'm not a big believer in that theory. People call it race dep. I'm not a huge fan of it for numerous reasons, which are beyond the scope of this video. But just to apply it to North Carolina, assuming that trends continue and white rural voters do continue to move Republican, as every election in the past 2 decades has suggested, he will do better in rural North Carolina. And in these cities themselves, turnout will likely fall, which will hurt Biden, and that's a death sentence. Doesn't matter how well he does in the suburbs, unless he does something Herculean, he will not win this state. And thus, I think Trump wins it by 3, 4, maybe 5 points if he's lucky. Again, as if the election was held tomorrow. In November, for example, I talk a lot about turnout and how that hurts Biden. If we see evidence that Biden is gaining enthusiasm with Democratic voters, or if there is just more energy on his side, that could change. But if it were held tomorrow, I think it's pretty safe to assume turnout would not be great. Now, another state where this is going to impact him negatively is Georgia. Georgia is a state that I am still bullish on Democrats in general. The consensus as of right now is that Trump is essentially guaranteed to win Georgia. I talked about that in my most recent video, and I explained why I disagree with it. I think the polls are overestimating Trump right now. He is up by 5% in 538's average if you look at it right here. And to me, definitely a concern for Biden, but I'm going to predict Trump's going to win Georgia, not because of what the polls are saying, but just because of turnout. Turnout's what matters here. In 2021, when Democrats won those Senate runoffs in Georgia, and in 2020 when Biden won the state, the electorate was 31% black in January 2021 and 29.5% black in November 2020. So Democrats, and again, in this 29.5% black electorate, Biden won by 10,000 votes. So we know 29.2 or 29.3 is really really 29.1, I think, actually, if you do the math right. But we know it's a little bit above 29% is the absolute minimum percentage of black voters in the electorate of Georgia in 2020 that Biden would have won with. And in 2022, we saw Warnock win that runoff with about a 29-30% black electorate, and he won by 3 because he did a little better with white voters. So regardless, Democrats need at least 29% of the electorate to be black if they're going to win Georgia. I think this year it could be 30% even, would be the number they need. And right now, if the election were held tomorrow or this week or sometime soon, I don't think Democrats would get that. I think right now, first of all, the polls do have Biden struggling with black voters. I think that narrative is true. I do think that there is evidence just based on turnout in special elections that Democrats are going to struggle with black voters this year in terms of turnout. Obviously, black voters are not going to suddenly swing towards Republicans and vote for Donald Trump, but I do think there's a turnout concern for Democrats that is very clear based on special election data. But the polls do corroborate that. Although, again, as I always say, if the polls are the number one, contention in your case, not a great argument. But just to kind of get out of this word salad that I've worked myself into, black voters especially in Atlanta, but all throughout Georgia, have genuinely been the reason Democrats have won these elections in the state recently. And Democrats have needed Herculean black turnout to win these elections, right? Like in 2022, Democrats would not have won that Senate race against Herschel Walker had they gotten, say, 2014 or even 2016 levels of black turnout. They needed the post-2020 black turnout operation that they've had in Georgia. And right now, the Georgia Democratic Party is well organized. They know what they're doing. They know how to get turnout because they've done that for the past 4 years. At the same time, Biden has a 37% approval rating. He's not polling great with Democrats. They're going to, Democrats in polls say they're going to vote for him, but they don't feel great about it. And so that's a problem for Biden because he needs, a vote isn't weighted by how enthusiastic it is. Like when you go to vote, there's no option for, 1 to 10, how happy are you to cast this vote? But it does kind of, work itself out in a way where if you have 10,000 voters and only, 35% of them say that they're enthusiastic to vote for that candidate, turnout will drop. As it, if you compare it to an electorate of 10,000 voters where 85% of them are enthusiastic to vote for their candidate, right? So turnout does drop in those situations. And I think right now with the enthusiasm problem that Biden faces, the fact that his polls are dropping with black voters, and another problem is young voters. Georgia has a lot of universities, and in 2020, they were okay for Biden. He actually can improve a good amount, but we know young voters are really, really turned off by Biden right now. I think all those factors just make me very, very skeptical. Biden can win Georgia. There's a path for it, but there's so many ifs and ands and buts that he needs to go his way. So many variables that he needs to fall in line. I think right now Trump is favored to win Georgia. So the final state that I'm going to put in the lean GOP column is Nevada. Now, Nevada right now, I think, is probably behind North Carolina the best bet for Trump. I wanted to get Georgia out of the way because it's right next to North Carolina. It's kind of a similar thing where I think turnout, especially among black voters, will hurt Biden. But in Nevada, it's a different thing. So Nevada is a state that has been trending red. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won it by 2.4% while winning the national popular vote by around 2.2%. So Nevada was about 0.2% bluer than the country as a whole, but it was roughly in line with the country if we're being, not as precise as we need to be. In 2020, Biden won the national popular vote by double what Hillary won it by, and he won Nevada by the exact same amount. So the country got twice as blue, but Nevada stayed the exact same. In 2022, Democrats did win the Senate race there, but they lost the governorship and they lost the House popular vote by around 3.5%. So, Democrats won the big race, but below that, it was not a great night for Nevada Democrats. Obviously, Nevada's geography is very good for Democrats, so it often masks that because Democrats did win 3 of Nevada's 4 House seats, but again, they lost the popular vote in the state. So Nevada as a whole in 2022 did vote on average more Republican than Democratic. And in 2020, Biden won the state, but it voted to the right of the nation. And the popular vote polls we have right now show that Biden is actually losing the popular vote. I don't believe that, but the country could shift to the right by a good amount. That's very plausible. If that happens, you'd expect Nevada to vote for Biden or to vote for Trump by a good amount. I think Trump will win Nevada by 3. As of right now, it's an inelastic state. It doesn't really move a ton in terms of margin, but Trump is in a good spot here. Again, if you look at 2020, it comes down to Clark County. This is where Las Vegas is. It's where about 3/4 of the population lives, where 3/4 of the electorate votes from. And in 2020, it swung to Biden, or it swung towards Trump by around 1.5 points. If that happens again, he's already going to win the state. Biden will do a little better in Washoe, but again, the problem for Biden is that I think he's going to do really poorly in Clark this year. Again, he won it by 9.4% in 2020. I think he wins it by like 6 or 7 this year, just because turnout will fall in Vegas. I think the suburbs, which did not move in Nevada's Vegas suburbs, didn't really move in 2020. I think that's another problem for Biden. There's no like leftward trend that he can bank on to cancel out a turnout drop. And the other problem is that Hispanic voters and black voters, again, in the polls are not looking good for Biden. Now, is that my sole argument? No, but even like the polls are showing a massive shift towards Trump with black and Hispanic voters. Even if they're wrong and the shift is like 20% as big as they're expecting, it would still be enough for Biden to realistically be in trouble in Nevada. So for all those reasons, it's kind of like Georgia. Biden has a path here, but for every one path I can create for Biden, there's like 3 or 4 for Trump, and that's why I'm going to give Trump the advantage here. So now to go over to our toss-up states. These are our 3 toss-ups. Arizona's the least competitive of these, and I think Biden's going to win it by like just under 2% if as of right now. Democrats did really well here in 2022. It's kind of like I can't say Nevada is going to go red in part because of how well Republicans did here in 2022 in terms of the popular vote, and then turn around and say, oh, Democrats are also going to lose Arizona. They won the Senate race by 5. In the governorship, Katie Hobbs was supposed to lose, and she beat Carrie Lake. So Democrats overperformed here in 2022. In 2020, Biden won the state by around 0.3. It wasn't like a super impressive performance, but it was good enough to win the state and flip it blue for the first time in over 20 years. So it was definitely worth something. And then the problem for Republicans here is that Maricopa County is just like huge. It's like 60 to 70% of the state's electorate, and it gets bluer every year. In 2020, Biden did 5 points better than Hillary Clinton. He'll do. I think he'll win it by upwards of 4 points this year. He might win it by 5 points. Democrats did really well here in 2022. It's rapidly growing. It's getting more diverse. Its suburbs are just moving towards Democrats by so much every year. This is a time bomb for Republicans, and it just is one they can't reverse. Because like the thing with Georgia is that the Atlanta suburbs are also like getting a lot more diverse and more Democratic. But at least in Atlanta, if there's a turnout drop, that can kind of cancel it out. Whereas in Arizona, Phoenix is big, but it isn't as dominant within its metro area the way Atlanta is. And so even if there's a turnout drop for Democrats within, downtown Phoenix, it won't matter because they can cancel it out because Arizona has, just such sprawling suburbs. So that is why I think Arizona is going to go to Biden. And then we have the Rust Belt. It's always the Rust Belt. It's what it comes down to. And we're going to go through it here. So I think that Biden will probably lose Wisconsin. Now, this is kind of an oxymoron because a lot of people are predicting Biden to win Wisconsin because it's his best state or best swing state in terms of the polls. Right now, if you look at its polling average, it's very close. Trump only ahead by 0.7. But here's the thing. All the polls we have that show Biden like ahead, like this poll from FAU, he's at 40% here. He's at 40% here. He's at 44% here. And then they pushed he's at 51, but he's at 40. And this is a Democratic internal anyways. He's at 46 here, which is okay, but Trump's at 47. So, what can you say? He's at 45 here, and then he's at 47. This is like his best poll because this poll and the NYT Siena poll, they had Trump winning everywhere, and then in Wisconsin they had Biden winning in their registered voter screen. Although when they screened it for likely voters, they had Trump winning, so still a mixed bag. So all the Biden polls, they're good for him. Wisconsin is definitely a toss-up, but I'm gonna go away from the polls and just talk about geography and the demographics for a second here. Wisconsin is a very white state. It's a state where in 2020 Trump, obviously he came close to winning. He didn't get there, but he didn't Trump can do a lot better in these rural counties. It's kind of like the North Carolina thing where, in neighboring, in like the Dakotas, or if you go to Missouri or other states in the Midwest like Indiana, those rural counties are like 80% Republican. In Wisconsin, they're like, 61% here, 66% here, 59% here. So Trump can do a lot better. Biden, I believe, will also see a turnout drop in Milwaukee. Madison is another city that's been really big for Democrats in the past few years. Biden not really doing well with young voters, big college town. That could be a recipe for disaster. And then, obviously, Biden will do a little better in the suburbs. He'll do a little better in the WAV counties outside of Milwaukee, but it won't be by enough. And I think that he'll lose Wisconsin by like a point. Again, if it were held tomorrow. Could things improve by November? Sure, but I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm not going to predict such things to happen. So that's why I think Trump's going to win Wisconsin. Now, Michigan and Pennsylvania, I go back and forth on. And when I wrote the outline for this video, I was kind of like, I could convince myself either way. I could debate myself on this for 20 minutes, but I'm going to give my prediction because obviously it isn't fun if I just leave them both as toss-ups. I think that Biden would win Michigan and lose Pennsylvania if the election were held tomorrow, so Trump would win the election. That's your winner. Now, here's what I think. Michigan, to me, even though the polls there are actually a little worse for Biden, actually, I mean, they're similar, but there have been a lot of concerns for Biden in Michigan that haven't existed in Pennsylvania. Here's why I think Biden would narrowly win Michigan tomorrow. And by narrowly, I mean by 0.4 or 0.5%. The biggest concern for Democrats is Biden struggles with Arab voters, but they are 2% of the state's electorate. They are a demographic that shifted toward Trump in 2020. So Biden already didn't do that well with them in 2020, and he still won the state by 155,000 votes or something like that. And so you would need like a 40-50 point swing among Arab voters in Michigan to give Trump the win there. And that doesn't account for the fact that Biden could have that happen to him and still win. Because again, you look at the 2020 map, he did really well in Grand Rapids, Kent County. That's a big county that casts 400, 500,000 votes in 2024, likely maybe a little less, maybe 400K if we're being more realistic here. It's growing. It's getting more Democratic. Biden, I think, could win it by 10 this year because it's just so left trending. Again, Detroit could obviously see a decrease in turnout, but Democrats in Michigan have really done a good job. Like, the Michigan Democratic Party is one of the best in the country. In 2022, they won the governorship by like 13 points. So the Republicans haven't done anything here like since 2016. And like, this obviously Trump came close to winning here in 2020, but there's just there's nothing for Republicans to build on here. Their state party, I think, went bankrupt in 2023, so they're just really disorganized right now. And yet Trump himself could be enough to win the state. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if Michigan did go red this year, but just the local organization really benefits Democrats here. And the best argument for Trump is like the argument that Biden will struggle with Arab voters. But again, people who argue that haven't really thought out just the math. And Biden, for every vote he loses with Arab voter, he can just make up by winning back suburban voters in Grand Rapids. So that, to me, is why I think Biden wins Michigan, but it's a toss-up. I think I gave a decent argument for why Biden wins it, but I could also make one for why Trump's going to win it, but I do think Biden's favored. Now, Pennsylvania, again, this would be the tipping point state because it would be the closest state in the country, and it would go to Trump. Pennsylvania is a pure toss-up. I'm a bit less sure about Trump winning it than Biden winning Michigan, but right now, I think if the election were held tomorrow, he'd probably be favored. Philadelphia is a concern for Biden. He didn't do that well there in 2020. It swung to the right. We saw a decrease in turnout. And he still won the state, but only by 1.2%. This year, Biden will do worse in Philadelphia. I expect a bit of his hometown boost in Scranton to wear off. I would expect him to do worse in the rural areas. Although, to me, Pennsylvania has a bit less room for Trump to grow than, say, Wisconsin, because in 2020, we saw Biden hold up like okay in rural Wisconsin. I showed you those counties earlier. He was at, Trump was at 60 to 65% in all of them when he should be at 75 to 80% in all of them. Pennsylvania, that's true to a lesser extent, but it still is true, and there's still areas for Trump to improve among rural voters. Biden will hold his ground in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has been really good for Democrats in the past few years. John Fetterman did really well there in 2022. But the main reason I think Biden would lose Pennsylvania if the election were held tomorrow is that Philadelphia metro area is a concern for him. So let's just go to the map here. In 2020, Biden netted around 480,000 votes out of this city, and turnout will drop by a lot here. Philadelphia has a substantial Black and Hispanic population. Those are two demographics I think it's a lot of people are expecting Biden to struggle with. Also, a lot of colleges in Philadelphia, or not a lot, but Pennsylvania. The University of Pennsylvania, it's not a big school, but it is there. I think Temple University is in Philadelphia, so there's some, and then you also have Penn State, which is absolutely massive in the middle in Center County in State College, Pennsylvania. So across the state, there's a good amount of universities. And then just going back to Philadelphia, it's a young city. You have a lot of voters of color, two demographics Biden's been struggling with. And then the suburbs of Philadelphia, Biden did well here in 2020. He did well enough to compensate for not doing that well with working-class Pennsylvanians. But again, in 2022, obviously Josh Shapiro did really well in these counties, but John Fetterman John Fetterman improved on Biden's numbers in almost every county in Pennsylvania, but the ones where he did that comparatively by less were the Philadelphia suburbs, Chester County, Montgomery County, and then Bucks County. So Biden could definitely win Pennsylvania, but I think the Philly turnout drop, combined with the fact that in 2022 Democrats could have done better in the Philly suburbs. They did fine. They did well, but they could have done a lot better. I think why Trump would win Pennsylvania if it were held tomorrow. Now, this is a close election. I know right now Trump has the momentum, and a lot of people are predicting a landslide for him. I'm not going to give you that because I don't think landslides are possible in this modern electorate that is so polarized. I also think that Biden is being underestimated by the polls to a certain extent. So yeah, that's kind of what I think about the state of the race right now. Let me know what you are expecting. Let me know what you want to see next. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video. And again, like I said at the beginning of the video, please subscribe if you're not already. because it really does help me out. So, like I said, I appreciate your time, and I'll see you all in the next video.